Good afternoon. My name is Kim Ponzio, and I'd like to welcome you to the Society of Wetland Scientists December Wetland Legacy webinar, where we'll be hearing about global trends in wetland loss and degradation and what we as the global wetland community can do about it. I want to offer a special welcome to any non-member guests we have joining us today for our quarterly free webinar. All of our webinars are complimentary to SWS members, but once a quarter, we open it up to the public. And our next free quarterly webinar will be held in March 2020, where we'll feature two speakers talking about the challenge of managing invasive plants in wetlands. So before we get started today, I'd like to give you our guests a quick overview about what SWS is all about. And as you can see on this slide, our mission is to promote the understanding, conservation, protection, restoration, science-based management, and sustainability of wetlands. Since its founding in 1980, the International Society of Wetland Scientists has continued to grow with greater than 3,000 members from over 60 countries around the world. We have a diverse membership hailing from all sectors of science, academia, practitioners, consultants, government employees, NGOs, and a large sector of students. We're committed to providing our members meaningful resources that promote wetland education, conservation, and restoration globally. SWS membership includes full access to the Wetlands Journal and our trade journal, the Wetland Science and Practice, as well as other professional journals such as Wetlands Ecology and Management. In addition, SWS members enjoy discounted rates for the SWS Professional Certification Program, access to regional chapter and section activities, student programs and grants, and discounted registration at the SWS annual meeting, which in June 2020 will be in Quebec. All of this provides the members opportunity to network with wetland professionals from around the world. So if you would, please visit our website at sws.org to learn more about becoming a member and to renew your membership and all the member benefits. And the SWS Webinar Committee has been hard at work lining up quality webinars for our members. In addition, we're expanding internationally, our international reach through quarterly Spanish webinars and our soon-to-come wetland interviews. So to support our expanding programs, we are opening up the opportunity for the very first time to the wetland community for sponsorship of our regular SWS webinar series. We're limiting it to just 4 annual sponsors for maximum impact, whose organizations will be promoted prior to, during, and after our webinars. And if you're interested in learning more about this, please contact our committee member in charge of the sponsorship program, Roy Maceras, at the email address there, or you can also email the SWS office at info@sws.org. So we're hoping that we can kick this off in the new year, and we're offering an introductory price of $1,000 for the entire year of sponsorship and advertisement for those 4 organizations. So make sure you're among the first to jump at this opportunity. And we have participation certificates that are now available if you are watching the webinar. It's an automated process. You will receive an email from our SWS Managing Director, Michelle Chosek, about 1 day after the webinar. And if you don't see it, make sure you check your spam email. So these certificates are free to SWS members and are available for non-members for a nominal cost of $20. Participation certificates are also available for those who watch our recorded webinars, and you can find those under past webinars, as you can see on this slide, and you can also find those on the YouTube channel. So you can use these certificates for CEUs for your professional certifications, such as Professional Wetland Scientist or Certified Ecological Restoration Practitioner. Again, my name is Kim Ponzio, and I am a past president of SWS and the current chair of the SWS Webinar Committee. And I'm going to be your moderator today. So before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. The general format for today's webinar will be a 45-minute presentation, followed by about 15 minutes for questions and answers. And anytime you can go to that questions pane that is highlighted and type in a question for our speaker, and I will pose those questions to the presenter at the end of the presentation. You can also get a PDF handout of the presentation today under the handouts pane. And this is also being recorded, so you will see it on the past webinar slides on our website. And also, if you're tech savvy, please use hashtag SWS webinar to tweet about our webinar. And with the logistics out of the way, we'll go ahead and introduce our speaker. It's my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Nick Davidson. Nick is an independent consultant on wetland conservation and wise use. He was the Deputy Secretary General of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands from 2000 to 2014. He has long-standing experience in and a strong commitment to environmental sustainability, supported through the transfer of environmental science into policy relevance and decision-making at national and international scales. He has over 40 years of experience of research on the ecology, assessment, and conservation of wetlands, and the flyway conservation of migratory water birds. Prior to his Ramsar Convention post, he worked for the UK's national government conservation agencies on development planning, coastal wetland inventory, assessment, information systems, and communications, and as international science coordinator for the global NGO Wetlands International. Nick's current work includes supporting enhanced Ramsar Convention implementation in Myanmar and Bhutan, strategic planning for Ramsar regional initiatives, and research on improving the global knowledge base on the area, distribution, status, trends, and management of wetlands. Since 2009, he has been an adjunct professor at the Institute of Land, Water and Society, Charles Sturt University in Australia. He's an honorary fellow of the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management, was presented with the Society of Wetland Scientists International Fellow Award in 2010, and SWS's Lifetime Achievement Award this past June for his long-term contributions to global wetland science and policy. Nick also chairs the SWS's Ramsar section, is the chair of the East Asia-Australasia Flyway Partnership Technical Subcommittee, that's a mouthful, and is associate editor of the peer-reviewed journal Marine and Freshwater Research. So with that, I would like to hand over control and welcome Professor Nick Davidson.
Thank you very much indeed, Kim, for that introduction. Yeah, I'm just Nick, whatever the professorship is. But what I want to talk about today, and I hope you can hear me, is what's happening with wetlands in the world. And we've been doing quite a lot of research, and some of this you're going to see is new, it's not yet published, or is just published this week, about what's happening with our wetlands and what on earth can we do about the situation. It's broadly a negative story, but there are some positives. So I will see if this now works as the first slide. Yes, I want to talk first about the importance of wetlands. I'll talk about a little bit about what we know about the value of wetlands, and then tell you what our latest intelligence is about the state of our wetlands, both in terms of area and changes and the state of the remaining wetlands, and then what's driving that and what can actually we can do about that. In 2005, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, the MA, gave us a new paradigm about talking about ecosystem services, the benefits that people obtain from ecosystems or obtain from nature. And they coded it in 4 categories: provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting. We commissioned in the Ramsar Convention, which I then worked for, a specific report about wetlands and water from the MA. And part of the work we did there was to look at an expert opinion summary of the services provided by different wetlands. This was the first time we'd ever done this. And don't look at, you can't read the scripts, but look at the blobs. There's a lot of big blobs, a lot of wetlands, a lot of wetland types deliver a lot of wetland services. We refine that, just as an example, for mangroves, the major importance is food for fisheries and fish production, timber, climate regulation, pollution, storm protection, biodiversity. For lakes, major importance, food again, fishing, freshwater provision, climate regulation, managing water particularly. We refined that a little bit in some further work when I was with the Ramsar Convention we did with the Danone Fund for Nature. And we tried to score the delivery of ecosystem services, benefits to people. The most important thing on that graph on the bottom left-hand side is just simply to see that bottom is inland wetlands, top is coastal wetlands, and the top is human-made wetlands. Human-made wetlands do far less for us than natural wetlands. They are not delivering very much indeed. So maintaining natural wetlands is really important for our lives. Okay, so that's the importance of wetlands. How valuable are our wetlands? Well, there's quite a lot of argument still as to whether economic or monetary value of ecosystems is a good or bad thing. It can help us and get messages to decision makers, but it's only one part of the story. And remember this when I show you the next slides. We can't put a dollar value on many ecosystem services, for example, cultural and aesthetic values. But if you walked out into the street outside your office today and stopped people in the street and said, what do you think is the most valuable ecosystem in the world? What would they say? You can't answer that right now, but I will tell you the answer. It's that. It's tropical forest. Because the forest community has done a fantastic public relations job on getting recognition of the importance of forests. But how do forests compare to wetland ecosystems? Let's have a look at it. A few years ago, the TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, did some work to calculate the unit area value of different ecosystems. And as you can see here, if we can get that working right, temperate forests, tropical forests are very important. But also look at the wetlands. There's rivers and lakes, and there are the rest of wetlands, inland and coastal wetlands and coral reefs. Huge value. But look at the bottom scale on this. That's a log scale. If you remember as little as I do from our school education about arithmetics, that's every bar in there is tenfold difference. So why did the T present the data in this way? Well, that's why. There are forests right down there. You can hardly see them because up there are the unit area value of coastal and inland wetlands. Orders of magnitude bigger by hectare than any other ecosystem. And this has been not recognized. We have been undervaluing our wetland importance. I'll come back to this now. So we started in the last year to have a look at what the real monetary value of wetlands is. And remember, this is not the whole value, it's a minimum value, and it doesn't include all the different values wetlands to the people. But what can we do? What we did, we took the published results of particularly Bob Constanza's work, for the best estimate of unitary monetary values. And we applied these to some recent work that I and others, Max Finlayson, have been doing to what the best estimate of global areas of wetlands are. And we wanted to see what came out. First thing that came out was that the global areas of wetlands that the previous estimate have used are wrong. And compared to our most recent estimates, the previous areas were for coastal wetlands too large, for inland wetlands too small, and also for all wetlands. So we applied our new estimates of that information. So what did we find out? And it's important to remember that these are approximations. We're doing our best we can at the moment. We need better data. The figures we had available to us were just for broad wetland biomes. We couldn't disaggregate them to our fine wetland classes, but we're working on that with the Ecosystem Services Partnership to refine this lot. But given that, what's the story? All natural wetlands, minimum over $47 trillion annually are what they're delivering to people. I didn't include it in this talk because I was trying to find out what $47 trillion looks like. It's a huge value, but we don't know what it looks like. And I had a look this evening, and $1 trillion is about 500 football pitches worth of $100 notes snapped up. This is huge value. It's also twice the value for all the world's forests. And it comes from both inland wetlands and coastal wetlands. So wetlands have huge unit area. They have huge total monetary value. They are 43%, almost half the global value of all the world's biomes. And if you look down at this little graphic at the bottom, those are oceans, those are terrestrial, this little wedge is wetlands. But look on the right-hand side about how much they're delivering, almost half the world's value of wetlands. These places are hugely important to us. And coastal wetlands particularly, less than 1% of the Earth's surface, nearly 20% of the value of all the world's biomes. So what's delivering this? Coastally, it's hugely coral reefs, but a lot of other systems as well. Inland, it's non-forested peatlands and other marshes and swamps and natural lakes. It's all about water. A huge proportion of the value we get from wetlands is to do with how they manage water, flood mitigation, purification, groundwater recharge, storm surge, and also carbon storage. And we're probably still underestimating the value of wetlands for carbon, but we're working on that right now. Where's it being delivered? Well, if you look on the left-hand side at the surface area of the regions of the world, and then convert that and compare that with the monetary value of wetlands for the world, yep, Asia has a huge surface area, big delivery. Same in North America, big area, big delivery. This is all to do particularly with northern peatlands. Oceania is very interesting, small area, but huge delivery because that's coral reefs. The other side of the coin is Africa has a very large area of the world, but isn't delivering currently, as far as we know, as much in terms of value of wetlands. So, given that huge importance and value of wetlands, have we been looking after her? What's the answer? I'm afraid it's no. Just some examples. Over many centuries, we have been converting wetlands for other purposes. They are the wastelands, they're the swampy, nasty, smelly places. And here's a couple of examples from earlier work I was doing a long time ago. This data comes from 1500 AD, and you can see the piecemeal loss of wetlands nibbling away at the edges. On this one, another couple of examples, another example in the UK, the Tees estuary. Again, piecemeal loss, and that picture is a kind of Pyrrhic victory, because that truck on the right sank without trace into the wetland. They never got it back again, but they continued reclaiming it with the other trucks, and that huge intertidal wetland area was destroyed. More recently, or perhaps less recently, from some work we've been doing in the past, possibly, and it's important to recognize that this is only where records exist, and this is probably overestimates, but we may have lost almost 90% of our wetlands in the world since 1700 AD, 64, 65% since 1900. And I'll come back onto this in the next slide. 35% since in the last 45 years. We are still destroying our wetlands. Why are we doing that when the value is so high? And the rate of wetland destruction has been historically in the 20th century almost 4 times faster than previously. It varies. What we've found from this analysis is regionally. Europe has been very high in the second half of the 20th century. Post Second World War reconstruction, make food, destroy wetlands. North America, it's been much slower and it's been reducing. Asia, it's been continually very high. I'll come back to that in a moment. And look at this. Here are the long-term historical changes, quite slow because the technology wasn't there to do it. But look at what's been happening in China, Korea, Yellow Sea, East Asia. Huge, rapid rates of loss recently, but the Chinese government has recently decided that is wrong and has put a ban on reclamation further or land claim further. And that's a wonderful result to hear. Looking recently, we have a wet index which we constructed working with the World Commission, the UNEP WCMC. What that tells us is that overall, we've had 35% loss of wetlands in the last 45 years. It's still continuing. It's happening inland and coastal across all regions, but the greatest loss is Latin American, Caribbean, and Africa. And this is a common theme I'll come back to. It's been a steady rate of loss since 1970 up until 2010, but then we suddenly find the most recent results, it's almost doubled again. So instead of stopping wetland loss and conversion, we seem to be accelerating it, and that is not good for the value of wetlands to people. In contrast, what we've been doing with human-made wetlands is the opposite, a 233% increase in the area of human-made wetlands, and that's primarily rice production and reservoirs. It's not all conversion of natural wetlands, because it's conversion of drylands as well. But there's a real issue there that we're converting our natural wetlands that deliver so much to us to human-made wetlands which don't do as much for people. So given that story of this worryingly and accelerating loss of wetland area, what's happening to the species that depend on wetlands? Well, not surprisingly, it's not good. And Ramsar's Global Wetland Outlook, and I would encourage you to download that on the URL at the bottom here, just simply said, wetland-dependent species are increasingly threatened with extinction. just one example of that. This is the Living Planet Index, which looks at trends in the population size of species. What it shows us in the most recent one is that freshwater inland wetland species have declined by over 80% since 1970. Look at that. And that's a hugely greater decline than the marine and coastal ones and the terrestrial ones. Wetlands are in real trouble, and we are continuing to ignore that. Similarly, the IUCN Red List, which is a pretty crude assessment of species, just simply says that wetland-dependent species are increasingly moving towards extinction. This is not good news. And some work I did for the Global Wetland Outlook simply says over 25% of species in many wetland-dependent taxa are globally threatened with extinction. You can see the red bars there. I'm going to digress very slightly and talk about water birds, and particularly shorebirds, which is my previous main area of research. Water birds actually, compared to many other globally threatened wetland taxa, have a relatively low level of global threat, only 18%. But uniquely, we have data on what is the most biologically relevant taxon level of these birds, the biogeographic population moving up and down flyways. And that tells us they were in a poor and deteriorating state, and in 2005, nearly half the populations were decreasing. The Red List hasn't picked this up yet. It also tells us that long-distance migrant water birds are particularly in trouble, but there is some good news. Let's have a look. On the left, you can see these are the different flyway populations from East Atlantic across to America. All the migratory water birds have been in decline. The resident ones have been doing not too badly. And we have some information for 3 of these flyways on the left, which says that East Atlantic flyway, that's the European side of the Atlantic, has been not in too bad a state, but it's getting worse. North American flyway, a worse state, but getting better. But East Asia, Australasia is in serious trouble. So we need to pick out not just the Red List, but also look at more precisely at the storylines. So that's what we have as terms of information about loss of wetlands and the impacts on wetland-dependent species. What about the wetlands we haven't yet trashed? It's a big gap in knowledge, and the SWS Ramsar section has recognized this over the last few years, and we've been doing some work to try and understand more about what is the state of our remaining wetlands. And there are 2 new, when I put this PowerPoint together, as yet unpublished, but there's one now published, analyses we've been doing on the status and trends of the ecological character and what is the state of the health of our remaining wetlands. One is the Society of Wetland Scientists World Wetland Network Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust survey we did 2 years ago on the state of the world's wetlands. That now has been analysed, and it's a paper we're waiting to have confirmation will be published in Wetlands. The second source is what Ramsar contracting parties, what the governments to the Ramsar Convention have said in their national reporting every 3 years. And I put in a question some years back to ask them qualitatively what's happening with your wetlands and your Ramsar sites. And we now have some information from that. And although it says at the bottom there it's in press, in Marine and Freshwater Research, it was published yesterday. If you go on Marine and Freshwater Research and the most recent issue, it's free to download for the next month, the story I'm now going to tell you. So what about the Citizen Science Survey? What did that tell us? Of people all around the world, over 500 people sent us a view about a wetland they knew. they know. And this is fantastic. It's never been done before, and we're going to run it again next year. I'll come back to that. What was really encouraging is that the respondents to this survey said that broadly, more wetlands are still in good state than in poor state. But see, there are big regional differences. And again, Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean is where they're reporting wetlands are in a very bad state. But the trend in the state of wetlands is a very different story. Not so good. Our citizen scientists reported that more wetlands are deteriorating than improving. And that's happening across 5 of the 6 regions of the world. And it's, again, particularly widespread deterioration in Latin America and Africa. There's also a very, very worrying, for me, story that comes out of this. For people who reported their wetlands were in a good state, and that's over on the right-hand side here, they also said 90% of those are not changing or are improving. So good state wetlands are getting better. But the other side of the coin is this one. Wetlands that people said are already in a poor state, over 70% are getting worse. That's a real worry. Now let's see what governments have told us. In terms of trends and the character of wetlands generally, it's not good news. And this is what governments are saying. There's far more widespread deterioration than improvement globally over the right-hand side here and in every region. And it's got increasingly widespread since 2011. Again, worst in Africa, Asia. This one's coming out slightly differently, better in Latin America and the Caribbean, but we shall see. What about Ramsar sites, wetlands of international importance? Governments are reporting they are much better state than wetlands generally. There's more widespread improvement than deterioration, but it's getting worse still. So to summarize that, we're finding from what government are reporting to the Ramsar Convention every 3 years is that Ramsar sites are consistently, the black bars, better state than wetlands generally, but there is increasingly widespread deterioration of both Ramsar sites and all wetlands over time, even since the last few years in 2011. That's not good news. So what's driving all of this? We asked the Citizen Science Survey people, what do you think is causing the problem, or what's positive and what's negative? And what was very encouraging was, because a lot of people just talk about threats, and that's not what's positive, is there are 3 drivers that came out amazingly powerfully as positive: local community engagement and understanding and awareness, implementing conservation management measures, and tourism. If it's managed right, ecotourism can help maintain your wetland. But there are a heck of a lot of negative drivers, all these ones down here, which are all the usual suspects: pollution, invasives, agricultural runoff, industrial and urban development and infrastructure, conversion of wetlands. And those are widely regarded as very negative. So, much has been done and is being doing to implement conservation actions for wetlands. But you've seen the story I've just showed you, it's not working, is it? Why? In summary, we are not going to achieve what Ramsar set up in 1971 as its goal: stemming the encroachment on and degradation of wetlands. We've done a lot, it's not done enough. We're not going to achieve the 2020 Aichi biodiversity target. We're not going to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We're going in the wrong direction. The drivers of wetland loss and degradation are continuing. Directly, conversion to other land uses, invasives, pollutions, and so on. And indirectly, water diversions, water management. So why is this still happening? Why aren't we dealing with looking after wetlands? So I just want to round off by asking 3 questions. First one is, are governments doing enough to implement their commitments under these agreements like Ramsar? Secondly, would wetlands be in a worse state if it wasn't for what they've been doing? And thirdly, are the impacts of what we could call ultimate drivers, the elephants in the room, overriding everything else you do sectorally under 1 and 2? These are not mutually exclusive, and I want to show you some evidence for each. First one, are governments doing enough to implement Ramsar? No. There's a huge range of national implementation reported in the national reports governments make. It ranges from 7% of the commitments in the strategic plan for Ramsar to over 85%. Although I would say that we have some suspicions about some of the over 85% reporting because we don't think they're telling accurately what they're doing. We'll come back to that later. But overall, on average, governments are implementing only 50%, only half of the commitments they make to deliver wetland conservation and wise use in the strategic plan. And intriguingly, most regions are the same. A little bit higher in North America and Oceania, but not that much higher. So what's the problem? Is it a capacity and resourcing issue? Yeah, probably part of that. It's also a commitment issue. But on this graphic, you can see there's a positive correlation that wealthier countries and countries with higher GDP are actually doing more implementation than poor countries. But you can see there's a huge range down in the poor countries. So they need more help, more support. It's a classic story of environmental issues, and environmental ministries are under-resourced and weaker ministries, and they're not able to do enough. So second question, would our wetlands be in a worse state if it wasn't for Ramsar implementation? And there is some evidence for this from the work we've been doing and the national reporting and the state of wetland reporting. So governments reporting improving wetland state better on this graph, they're doing on average more implementation than those reporting deterioration. So if you get off your backside, out of your office and do stuff, you might actually manage to look after your wetland. And we have, oh no, what happened there? I've lost it. Now I have lost the images. I have 4 more slides. I'll have to ask Tony to.
Yeah, Nick, I think Tony will have to probably get it back
Tony
up
will
there.
have to pick them up again for me.
There we go.
Here we go. We're there. We're getting there. Thank you, Tony. Technology is wonderful. Shall I just keep, Tony, you control at the moment?
Yep, I'm in control. Tell me when to stop.
Carry on, carry on, carry on, carry on, carry on. Keep going. Keep going. More. 2 more slides. 1 more. Yeah, we're there. Thank you very much. There's always going to be a technology glitch on this, isn't there? Okay, we have some evidence. I don't have control again yet. Sorry, listeners, I'm just waiting to get control back to run the next slides through. Tony, can you? Oh, there we go. Yep, that's perfect. So we've been starting to look at what is it that governments need to do to make sure their wetlands are in a good state. And some of the initial analysis we've done is you need to do two things as governments. You have to have an authorizing environment, a national policy, national legislation, environmental impact rules about assessing the impacts of any development on wetlands. But you also then, underneath that, need to do on-the-ground implementation on wetlands, on Ramsar sites. If you do only one of those or the other, it won't work. But the problem we have is that still less than half of Ramsar contracting parties, Ramsar governments, actually have a policy in place, overarching, to actually facilitate the on-the-ground implementation. So there's a way to go. Tony, I'm not getting control of this. I can't move it. Ah, there we go. Third question is it the sort of elephants, or maybe we should say more wetland-related hippos in the room, the ultimate drivers overriding all these efforts people are trying to do in country? And this is a big question, and we really don't know yet the answer to this, but we have a strong suspicion this may be the case. There's one analysis that was published by Amane et al. In Nature a couple of years ago, which is really fascinating. And this looked at the trends in waterbird populations in relation to major ultimate drivers. It concluded that successful conservation of global waterbird populations depends on effective governance. So if you don't have good governance at the high level and policies or anything else, you won't maintain your waterbird population. Fascinating also, it said that looking at protected areas, no matter how much protected area you have named, it only works in terms of supporting waterbird populations if you have good governance. In other words, if you have paper parks, it doesn't work. And we're now doing some further analysis through the SWS Ramsar section to look at this further, looking at all sorts of different indices of the state of the world and state of countries. First finding is that we think that it may be the speed of change in economies, the gross domestic product, may be the strongest driver in terms of what happens to wetlands. In other words, if you are going for rapid economic growth, that overrides anything to do with the environment, and that is not a good finding, but we'll keep working on this and report that to you next year. So, given the situation, which is mostly depressing, but with some positives and some pointers of what might be possible to do, what can the Society of Wetland Scientists do and its members do to help? If any of the 72 of you listening in right now are not members of SWS, the first thing is to join the society. It is vibrant, exciting, and we have a lot of things we can do to help address this issue. Second thing I think is important is to keep improving the wetland science evidence base so that we can talk about the importance, value, and state of wetlands and get this into the hands of decision makers. Also, and this has been already happening, particularly in the US with the SWS membership, is oppose with that evidence-based science any weakening of national wetland policy and legislation, and the WOTUS going on in the US right now is a classic example of that. We need strengthened legislation and policy, not weakened, to maintain wetlands for what they deliver in this enormous multi-football pitch value of wetlands every year. Through the Ramsar section, continue contributing to the work of the Ramsar Scientific and Technical Review Panel, STRP, and Matt Simpson is our current representative on that. Also work with national governments directly, support them to help improve their implementation of wetland conservation and wise use. And we have been doing through members of the Ramsar section, we have currently supporting Myanmar and Bhutan and several other countries in helping them to improve their capacity to delivering what Ramsar expects. Also, you all know about the wetlands you work on, you research on. 2 years ago, we ran jointly with the World Wetland Network and the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust the State of the World's Wetlands Citizen Science Survey. We had over 500 valuable responses to that, and the paper, as I said earlier on, should be coming out very shortly summarizing it. We are planning to run a second survey. We need more people. We need all of you to contribute your knowledge on the state of the wetland you know. We're launching it next year. We'll publicize this further. But I think also, finally, don't stay in your box. Be innovative. Overall, I think traditional wetland conservation has not worked, and it's not working. You've seen the stories. We're destroying wetlands. We're not looking after them. We need to come up with some new approaches to achieve the end point of looking after our wetlands. And you may be aware that there are a load of discussions going on within SWS on developing a universal declaration of wetland rights. And we're going to discuss that further at the Quebec 2020 conference and also the Intercol conference in Christchurch in New Zealand next year. Join in that discussion, see what you can contribute. That's the point. I will stop. So thank you very much all for listening, and I'll hand back to Kim and the moderators.
Thank you, Nick. Really appreciate that very extensive presentation. And I think we can maybe go ahead and get straight to the questions and answers. Perfect timing, by the way. We're at 1:46 right now, so we have about 15 minutes.
There is a first time for everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. You did a great job.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, there's many questions that I have, and I want folks to email or put their questions in the chat box for the questions pane. But I have a couple of questions from myself and my colleague about, well, first I wanted to start out with the monetary values, where you had the graph of the different monetary values for different continents. And one of the things is the African continent was one of the few that was a very big in area, but it didn't have a very big monetary value as far as wetland services, ecosystem services. So why is that? Can you elaborate on that?
I think I can. It's a twofold story, I think. We were very puzzled by that when we did this analysis. The first thing is that from the data we have, the proportional area of wetlands in Africa is actually quite small compared to most other continents. The data that we've published most recently says that if you work it out, only 7% of Africa is wetlands. And that compares with 11% in Asia, 26% in Europe, 13% in Latin America, 18% in North America. So although we think of Africa with the Okavango, with the Congo, with the Sud in Sudan and so on as having huge wetlands, a lot of Africa is dry, not wet. That's the first bit. So that means that when we work it out at a regional scale, there's not as much wetland area in Africa as there is in some other regions. The second thing is to do with this monetary value calculations. This is where we are quite nervous about these stories, because if you have a wetland in Europe or North America, which fishers are fishing and making their livelihoods out of fish, because of the economies of those countries, that's a high value. In Africa, most of the economies are poorer, and so the value to the people is actually calculated as less. So it may be just as vitally important to the people in a wetland in Africa to have fish that they can catch, but it's not valued as high. And this is one of the issues we're trying to work out, and we're trying to think further and discuss. absolutely as important to people's livelihoods in Africa to have fish, but it's not valued in dollar values as high. So we need to work on that one and ask those questions.
Right, right. Well, thank you. And I do want to mention, if you don't have a chance to ask a question now, on the screen you'll see Nick's email address. So feel free to email
send me a
him
message.
all your probing questions about
Yeah.
wetlands and their status and trends.
Kim, I should just admit that I just flew back in from a week in China on at a wonderful meeting about waterbirds and the biggest natural wet inland freshland lake in China called Poyang Lake, and learnt so much about that. But if I don't answer your questions immediately, it's because I have bad jet lag.
Totally understandable. You've done a stellar job with your jet lag, and I understand your 2 grandchildren were at your house last night. So
please send me
4-year-olds.
Any questions, send them to me. I'm happy to answer.
Right. Okay, I have another question, and I was thinking this too, as well as my colleague here. We were thinking about how you included coral reefs into your original comparison of the biomes. So if you took out the coral reefs, how would the coastal and inland freshwater wetlands, the coastal wetlands and the inland freshwater wetlands, compare to the other biomes? Like you had originally pointed out that we probably overestimated the value of forested, terrestrial forested systems.
We haven't overestimated. I think I would say we haven't overestimated the value of forests. Forests are very important, but the forest conservation people have done a fantastic public relations job on promoting forests. Wetland people have been silent. We have not been shouting this message anywhere near as loudly as we should have done. We must do it more. When you go to a climate change conference, as is happening in Madrid right now, it's the forest people shouting about how important forests are. Why aren't the wetland people shouting about wetlands? Coral reefs are included because the Ramsar Convention definition of wetlands includes coral reefs and nearshore marine systems. Coral reefs come out very important, and it's actually, when you look at the data behind it, to do with tourism potential, because the big value of coral reefs is people snorkeling and going and looking at coral reefs. It's tourism. Whereas the big value of many other wetlands is to do with the natural functions they do to managing water, safeguarding our water, looking after our water, storm surge, buffering, and so on. So coral reefs are a bit of a skewed angle on here, but they are very important because a lot of people go and look at coral reefs, and that counts in the ecosystem services assessment. When we disaggregate it, the delivery of other services, water functions and so on, and coral reefs also serve a function of storm surge buffering because they are fringing coral reefs around islands and so on. They're very important, but we shouldn't overestimate coral reefs because it's mostly to do with tourism and people going and snorkeling.
Well, and I definitely appreciate that. I don't know why. I think this is a general trend that scientists don't really seem to speak up. And I think we need to find our voice, or we at least need to let our societies, like Society of Wetland Scientists, be our voice for that, for those of us who are in maybe government positions or other positions where we can't speak up. But I do want to get to a question.
Absolutely. Can I just answer that point, Kim?
Sure. Oh, sure.
I think SWS has a unique role in speaking up. And what I've been working on and what I've just shown everybody on this presentation is the latest information to try and fill the gaps in our knowledge, to say this is the story we can tell. Now, SWS speak up about that story and shout it loudly and get involved in intergovernmental negotiations and discussions and explain how wetlands are so important, because we have totally undervalued them. All right, I'll shut up. Next question.
Yeah. Okay, this question, it says, the global picture you have presented is really helpful to put Mexico on it as a puzzle piece. Could you share specific examples and, if possible, its sources of governments designing mechanisms to change the way negative drivers degrade wetlands?
Ooh,
So do you have an example of governments that are designing ways or coming up with ways to change those negative drivers?
I'm not sure I can globally, but I have been with some colleagues. We call ourselves the Ramsar Related Expert Team, working with the government of Myanmar over the last 3 years to help support them to implement more of their commitments to Ramsar. And it's working. They are developing management plans for their important wetland areas. They've established a national wetland policy. We are working on a system of identifying all the wetlands that might qualify for Ramsar site designation. They've established a cross-ministerial Ramsar Natural Wetland Committee, and it's working. And it can be done. And with a little bit of support, a little bit of help, people can do what they know they want to do, but aren't necessarily quite confident about doing it. And if we can just build that confidence and be available to everybody and governments to say, how much have you done? And I've done a load of analyses in different parts of the world about how much are you doing, where are your gaps, and then pick it up and support them to do it, then they run with it. And Myanmar is a great example of what's happening, because they have done their own policies, they're established their own committee, and now they're working on the next phase of what can we do next. It can be done anywhere with a bit of will.
Yeah. I do.
And we're available to help anybody to do that. We've got the way we can approach this now, and we know some ideas about how to help governments do what they know they need to do and do it better.
I think that's a really important point, is that we need to, those of us that can speak up need to be their voice. And I kind of want to just share something with you that past President Julian Davies just shared with me on the question panes. In this, Bill Mumma is a climate scientist that we've worked with in the past on a number of action documents, we'll call them, on climate change in wetlands. And she tells us that Bill Mumma was at the Madrid Climate COP25 and was speaking about the importance of both wetlands and forests in responding to climate change. And he was on a panel with Greta Thunberg, which we all know.
Oh, wow.
Speaking very loudly about the impacts to the environment. And so, maybe there are ways that we could collaborate as SWS scientists if we don't feel like any particular topic is in our wheelhouse, like climate change. We could be doing interdisciplinary cooperation with other scientists to kind of ring that alarm bell where we can. Comments on that?
I think that's very, very important, and Bill Mumma's involvement, engagement in SWS processes, and SWS, in case anybody doesn't know, has been working on this whole climate change and wetlands issue really strongly for the last 2 or 3 years. And Bill's involvement has been fantastic, because he's connected to the forest and to the climate change issues, and we're connected to the wetland issues. We're bringing those together, and we published some wonderful stuff in Wetlands Journal and in Wetlands Science and Practice. Read it all, because this is going to continue, and this is raising the profile in just the right way. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, and I think too that the Declaration on the Rights of Wetlands is something else that people should look out for, that you mentioned.
Yeah. And I'll say it again. I'll say it again. Forward. Traditional nature conservation, wetland conservation has not worked, is not working, and will not work. It's not got resonance with people. In a few countries are very wealthy, it may have some resonance, but it is not what people need to know. So that's failed. Let's think about a different way of approaching getting the same solution to the problem. And I think the whole issue of rights of wetlands, the issue of climate change and maintaining wetlands, because they have enormous carbon sequestration and storage role, has not been well recognized yet. It's getting up the agenda. We in SWS need to push that hugely.
So I think that we have run out of time, so I want to thank you, Nick, for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you just got back from China, so thank you for sharing your expertise on the state of wetlands worldwide, and basically what we can do as wetland scientists and managers to halt and potentially reverse the decline. Before we sign off, I have a couple of announcements of upcoming SWS events. Please mark your calendars for our next SWS webinar in January, which will be presented by 5 women leaders in wetland science. And also our next Spanish webinar in March, that will be presented via a live recording. Does that make sense? It will be broadcast at one particular time on March 25th. And those, as a reminder, all those Spanish webinars are offered free to members and non-members alike to get engagement internationally in those Spanish-speaking nations. And then finally, please subscribe to any of our social media channels, Facebook, LinkedIn. Again, you'll see there the Latin American region Facebook page. Go on that. That's a lot of where we roll out our Spanish-speaking things, and we're going to be doing wetland interviews as well. So thanks again to Nick for sharing his expertise and insights, and thank you all for participating today in our webinar for December with our Wetland Legacy Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Nick Davidson. Thank you, Nick, so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kim, for facilitating this, and send me messages if you have further questions, and look at the papers we've just published.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So everyone have a wonderful day and a splendid holiday season.
Thank you.